I used to believe success came with a shine, the kind that made people turn their heads when you walked by. At 33, I had that shine. I worked at a Wall Street investment firm, wore suits that cost more than some people's cars, and carried a phone that never stopped ringing. People used to say, "Jason's going places," but no one ever asked where those places were leading me. Every morning I woke up before the city did, poured myself a cup of black coffee, and looked out the window of my Manhattan apartment. The skyline looked like a trophy, bright, sharp, unreachable. I'd smile, adjust my tie, and whisper to myself, "I'm winning." At least that's what I thought, because success has a way of making you deaf. Deaf to your exhaustion, deaf to your emptiness. And one Friday morning, my illusion shattered with a single sentence. My boss called me in, smiled like he was discussing the weather, and said, "We're downsizing." "I'm sorry, Jason, you're out." Just like that. 8 years of sweat gone. I didn't even ask why. I just nodded, packed my laptop, and walked out into the freezing wind. Nobody stopped me. Nobody even looked up. That was the moment I realized something. I had built my entire life around a job that could erase me in a minute. The first week felt like freedom. I slept late, ignored my phone, convinced myself I'd bounce back soon. But the calls never came. Recruiters stopped replying. The market was slow. My savings fast. Slowly the silence began to hum, the kind that presses against your chest and whispers, "Now what?" I tried pretending I was fine. I met old colleagues for coffee, laughed too loud, acted confident. But deep down, I was lost. At night, I'd sit by my kitchen window, watching the city lights flicker like signals I couldn't read anymore. The man who once managed millions couldn't even manage himself. Then one morning, something small happened. I walked into a little bakery, a quiet corner shop I used to pass every day but never entered. The smell hit me first. Fresh bread, warm cinnamon, a hint of butter. It was the smell of something honest. I stood there, watching an old man knead dough with slow, patient hands. There was no rush, no panic, no screens flashing red and green. Just rhythm, human rhythm. For the first time in months, I didn't feel anxious. I just watched. And I thought, there's peace in this. I went back the next day, and the next. At first, I pretended I was there for the pastries, but deep down, something was stirring. I started asking questions. How do you make that? How long does the dough rise? Why do you do that with your hands? The old baker, Tony, just smiled. "You learn by doing, not asking," he said. So one morning I showed up before sunrise and asked if I could help. Tony laughed, then handed me an apron. And that's how it started. No boardrooms, no briefings, just flour, heat, and silence. The first few days were rough. My bread came out flat, my arms ached, my tie never stayed clean. But I kept showing up. Something inside me, something tired but still alive, told me to stay. Tony once told me, "This isn't Wall Street. Here, mistakes feed you. Out there, they bury you." I didn't realize it then, but those words would stick with me for life. Weeks turned into months. My hands grew steadier. I started to listen to dough, the way I once listened to numbers, feeling, adjusting, waiting. And with every loaf that rose, so did something inside me. I began waking up early again, not for meetings, but for the quiet peace before sunrise. I started smiling again, not the polite, practiced one I wore in elevators, but the kind that reached my eyes. Money didn't matter much anymore. My savings were thinning, but I didn't care. I was finally living, not just surviving. Still, there were nights I doubted myself. What am I doing? How do I go from suits to aprons? But every morning, when the smell of fresh bread filled the air, the doubts melted away. One evening, Tony told me he was retiring. He said his knees were too weak, his hands too slow. Then he looked at me and said, "You've got what this place needs. Heart. Take it if you want it." I froze. Take it? The bakery wasn't just a shop. It was his life's work. But Tony meant it. That night, I walked home through the quiet streets of Brooklyn, city lights reflecting in puddles like stars. I thought about who I used to be, the expensive watches, the late-night deals, the emptiness behind every success. And then I thought about the smell of bread, the warmth of the oven, the laughter of early customers who thanked me like I'd given them something more than breakfast. By morning, I knew what I wanted. I cashed out what was left of my savings, signed the papers, and bought the bakery. Owning it wasn't easy. I burned loaves, miscounted change, even cried once when the oven broke mid-rush. But every mistake taught me something Wall Street never did: patience, humility, grace. People started coming for my bread, but staying for kindness. I remembered every face, every story. A widow who bought one bun every Sunday for her late husband. A little girl who loved chocolate muffins more than anything. A tired nurse who told me, "Your coffee is the only thing keeping me sane." That's when I realized I wasn't just selling bread. I was serving comfort. And one morning, standing behind the counter with flour on my hands and sunlight spilling through the window, I smiled and whispered, "I'm finally rich." Years later, a young man in a suit walked in, confident, sharp, the kind of guy I used to be. He ordered a croissant and said, "This place is yours. Didn't I see you around Wall Street once?" I nodded. He laughed. "And now you're baking bread. Man, life really hit you hard." I didn't argue. I just handed him his change and said, "No, life set me free." He looked confused. I felt lighter than I ever had. That night, as I closed up shop, I thought about everything I'd lost and everything I'd gained. I didn't have millions in the bank anymore, but I had peace in my chest, purpose in my hands, and laughter in my mornings. Some people chase wealth until they forget how to live. I did too, until life forced me to slow down. I used to think success was about climbing ladders. Now I know it's about finding balance. Because sometimes life breaks you just to rebuild you into who you were meant to be. And if you ever pass by a small bakery on Maple Street, you'll find me there. Apron dusty, smile warm, music humming from the old radio. I don't trade stocks anymore. I trade joy, one loaf at a time. Sometimes losing your job isn't the end of your life. It's the universe giving you back your soul.